In this section, we're going to look at the process of deploying a Microsoft 365 tenant. And a tenant is a unique instance of Microsoft 365, which is configured for use by your organization specifically, running on shared hardware in the Azure data centers. To set one up, you start by choosing the subscription that you want to use, identify any security and mobility components that'll be used, and then plan your migration of your data. First thing to do when setting up a new tenant is to choose the subscription that you're going to use. You could go with a Microsoft 365 business subscription, basic or standard or premium, or an enterprise subscription, an E3 or an E5, or an F3, which is first line workers, which is a more cut down and less expensive version of the enterprise subscription. Also, if you're an educational organization or a government organization, there may be special licensing available for you. And the question that comes up a lot when you're choosing a subscription is, how do I know which subscription to go with? So there are a number of considerations. For example, why is your organization moving to Microsoft 365? What services do you want to use? What are you hoping to accomplish? Different subscriptions, of course, provide access to different sets of services. Also, what's your organization's current IT infrastructure? In other words, what are you looking to replace or upgrade? Also, what's your organization's change management process? It may be important to consider, for example, what your intake for new users is or how you deploy new applications. And how many employees are going to use Microsoft 365? Among other things, you may choose different sets of subscriptions for different types of employees. And finally, what are your organization's plans for growth? The business subscriptions, for example, cap the number of users that you can license, which means that if you intend to grow beyond the number of licenses that are available to you, it may make more sense to go with a more advanced subscription. Now I'm going to show you how to create a new Microsoft 365 subscription. There are a number of ways to go at this. I'm going at it from the product comparison page, and I'm going to do an E5 subscription. So I'm going to say, buy now, and then enter an email address. In this case, I'm using an address that hasn't already been set up. If you use an address that's already associated with a Microsoft 365 tenant, it'll ask if you want to use that one, but you can still just set up a separate account. So I'm going to say set up account and then fill in some basic information about myself. And then click next. Next, it wants to text me to make sure that this is legit. So I'll fill in my verification code here. Next, it wants to know how I'm going to sign in. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is create a temporary domain name. It's suggested one, contoso566.onmicrosoft.com. I'm going to change this and leave my default username the way that it is and add a password. And click next. Next up is payment information. So now it wants to know how many licenses I want to buy. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to select one, but you can see I can pick as many as I want. And add a payment method. This is just a regular credit card. And once that's done, I can click Place Order, which starts my subscription. And now I'll get started. This now brings me to a little miniature setup process here. All of this stuff is stuff you can do later. So for example, I'm going to wait until later to install Office. I'm going to wait until later to change my domain. I'll say, yes, I like the setup process and submit. And then go to the admin center. And from here, I can continue setting up my tenant. Having chosen a subscription, you'll need to identify what security and mobility components you want. Azure AD is kind of de rigueur. You're going to need it because it provides identity for everything in Microsoft 365. But you might also want to use Azure Identity Protection, which automates the detection of identity-based risks and collects risk data for later investigation. Portal lets you export risk detection data to your security information and event management solution. And then you might also want Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. This, as it says, might require additional purchase, but this is going to provide you with additional abilities to manage, control, and monitor access to important resources in your organization. Also, Azure Information Protection, which provides you with labels. It allows you to discover and classify and protect documents and emails by applying labels to your content. And you may also want to use Microsoft Intune, which focuses on mobile device management and mobile application management. So when you create a new Microsoft 365 tenancy, you get a default domain. The default domain is always something.onmicrosoft.com. But you can, and usually will want to, configure a custom domain. And this can be a domain that you own, or it can be purchased by GoDaddy directly via the portal. And we're going to take a look at a demo of configuring a custom domain right now. Now I'm going to show you how to configure a custom domain. So I'm here in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and I'm going to start by going to Show All and expand Settings and select Domains. Currently, you can just see my default domain, and now I want to add a new one. And in this case, I'm going to add a domain that I already own. So I'm going to say, I want to use this domain. And since I already own it, I now need to demonstrate that I actually own it. And that means that I need to do something to its DNS records. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text record to the domain's DNS records. Here's the text record I'm going to add. It has to have a name of @, and this is the value. I'm going to copy this. And now I'll hop over to my registrar, which in this case you can see is my hosting provider is Bluehost. Obviously, Microsoft has detected this, but it can be any valid hosting provider. Okay, here I am at Bluehost, and I'm already in the DNS management for my domain. I'm going to go and find the text record section now and say I want to add a record. This, of course, is specific to the interface in Bluehost, but your experience will be similar to this. Okay, there we go. My text record has been added. And now I'm back over here in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and I'm going to click Verify. And as you can see, I initially get an error. We didn't detect that you added this new record to ms100demo.site. That's not surprising. It usually takes a while for these things to propagate through the DNS. So now I need to wait a bit. Now I've waited a while, so I'm going to try again. And there we go. Now, how do you want to connect to your domain? I'm going to add my own record, so I'll continue here. And now I do want to set up DNS for Exchange, and that means that I need to add some records. So first, I need an MX record. And this, as you can see, actually points to Outlook protection. So this is going to provide me with spam protection for my domain, conveniently enough. So back over here at Bluehost, I'll add that in. The next thing I need is a CNAME record to allow auto discover. This is to allow auto configuration of certain clients like Outlook. And last thing I need is a text record. This is for spoofing protection. And now I can continue. And just like earlier, it doesn't get detected right away, so I need to wait a bit longer. Okay, some time has passed, so we'll try this again. And there it is, my domain is configured. Yes, it was easy. And just cancel that and say done. And there it is, I now have a domain configured for my tenant. The next thing I can do now is go and configure user email. So I'm going to go to my active users, and I'm going to configure the email for this user here, Megan Bowen. As you can see right now, Megan's username and email uses the default domain, so I'm going to change that. And I'm just going to edit her primary and just switch it to use ms100demo.site and save the changes. And there it is. She is now Megan at ms100demo.site. Now, just to demonstrate that this is true, I'm going to sign into Office in an in private session, and I'm going to try signing in as Megan. As you can see, that's her username. And I'll send a quick message to myself using Megan's email. And back here, signed in as the admin. Here's that test email. And if we check Megan, you can see that she is in fact Megan B at ms100demo.site. So both her username and her email address have been changed now to use my custom domain. Now that we've configured our custom domain, I'm going to show you how to bulk update all of your users with the new domain information. As we've already seen, it's possible to manually update your users using the user interface here. For example, I clicked on Megan, went and managed username and email, and you can edit it here. But that, of course, would be tedious if you had to do it for all of your users. So what I'm going to show you instead is how to do it using PowerShell. So here in PowerShell, I have a script that I'm going to use to do the bulk update. And this is a pretty simple script. It's not the only way of doing this for sure, but I want to point out a couple of things. The first thing is that, as you can see, I need to use the Exchange Online Management module. And then I also need to use the Azure AD module because I'm actually doing two different things. I'm updating both the email address and the user ID. The Azure AD module is already installed on my machine, so I don't need to import it. In any event, so you can see I'm switching from the old domain to the new domain. I have to sign into both services, and then I'm just going to loop through all the mailboxes in the current Exchange tenant that have the old domain, and use that information to update both the mailbox using set mailbox and the user identity using set Azure AD user. So I'll go ahead and run it now. As you can see, it needs me to sign in, so I'll enter my password here. Does a little bit of configuration. And then, as you can see, processes all of my users. Okay, my script is done. And now back here in the admin center, if I go and refresh this, you can see that sure enough, all of my active users have now been updated. And if I go and check out Alex Wilbur here, for example, you can see that he has the ms100demo.site configured for his primary email address and username. And by default, he still retains the old domain name as an alias so that email and login will still work. After doing the initial configuration of your tenant, there are a number of next steps you might consider. These include configuring basic organizational settings and configuring tenant-wide service settings. There are dozens of organizational settings available to configure, and they fall into several categories. First, the services category, which is just sort of the global settings for the various apps and services. This is forever growing and changing. The security and privacy category, which is global security policies, and the organization profile, which is just general information about your organization, branding on your portal, support information, and so forth. To look at some of the details here under the services page, common settings include things like setting up mail auditing and mail flow rules, changing users' calendar sharing settings, and controlling the defaults for Edge and for the Bing homepage. Note that there are dozens more settings here, and you may not want to set most of them, but it's a good idea to just sort of look over the page and see what's available. Next, in the security and privacy category, settings that you might want to look at include things like the password expiration policy and privileged access, which is where you can provide temporary admin permissions to non-admins for specific applications, and the customer lockbox, which says that Microsoft isn't allowed to access your content even when they need to do service without getting your explicit approval. And the organization profile, as I said, is just where you set things up about your organization. So this is things like general information about your organization, any custom themes you want to set up for your Microsoft 365 portal, and release preferences, which governs how applications are going to be released to your various users. The organizational profile is just the basic information about your organization. It includes things like locations, contact info, and it also allows you to customize the user experience. And we're going to take a look at a demo of configuring it right now. Let's take a look at entering organization information. This is typically one of the early things you'll do after you've configured your tenant. Here in the admin center, I'm going to say show all and go to settings and org settings. This is, of course, where you can set a lot of different things about your tenancy. And one of the first things you'll typically do is go to organization profile, go to organization information, and just fill in the basics about your organization. And once all the information is filled in, I just click save. And that's now my organization information. Now I want to show you how to configure release preferences. Back here in the admin center, I'm going to show all and go to settings, to org settings, and select the organization profile and select release preferences. This is going to allow me to configure certain users to receive new features up to 6 months before general release. So for example, if I say targeted release for select users and save, then I get to pick the users that I want to assign it to. And I can say, for example, my user named Megan is a QA user. And so I want her to receive those things before everybody else. She's now been configured, and I now have release preferences configured for my organization. Another really important setup task is configuring tenant-wide workload settings, of which there are a lot. And some things are going to be configured directly from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and a lot of things are going to be from the dedicated admin centers for the specific applications, sometimes both. Now I'm going to show you how to configure Teams tenant-wide. Back here in the admin center, I'll say show all, expand settings, and go to org settings. And the services page here gives me high-level configuration of a lot of different services throughout my enterprise, including Microsoft Teams. Now, as you can see on the Teams blade here, there's not a lot that I can actually configure from here. I can turn it on and off. I can allow guest access. That's about it. Anything beyond that, then I need to go to the Teams admin center. And then, of course, from here, I can configure everything about Teams. I can manage my teams, change the settings, and so forth. Now you're going to want to figure out how to get support with your Microsoft 365 tenant. This is going to include finding Microsoft partners to work with and working with Microsoft Fast Track. A really neat feature of Microsoft 365 is that support from external partners is built right in. As a global admin or billing admin, you can go to the admin portal and go and select partner relationships, find a partner that meets the criteria that you want, get an invite from them, and then once you've received it, accept the terms in the invite, they get added to your admin portal, and then you can delegate administration to the partner. There are a number of roles that you can delegate. For example, they could be a reseller, someone that sells Microsoft products to your organization, a delegated administrator, which allows them to perform administrative operations in your tenant, a reseller and delegated administrator, and so forth. Fast Track is another support option that's available to Microsoft 365 customers. It's a combination of tools and resources and live support from Microsoft and Microsoft partners to help you with your deployment. And your specific resources are tied to your seat count. So everybody gets access to the digital resources if you have at least 150 seats. You also have access to Fast Track engineers or approved Fast Track partners. And if you have at least 500 seats, then you can also access the data migration support option. To sign up for Fast Track, you just go to the URL that you see at the top of the slide there, sign in with your Microsoft 365 account and fill in the form. And your request is usually approved immediately, and then you get your Fast Track dashboard with all of your available resources.